Nvidia shares are jumping today, eyeing a fresh record high and giving the Nasdaq a bit of a boost. The chipmaker saying it expects to resume sales of its H20 chips in China just days after CEO Jensen Huang met with President Trump. Joining me now on this is Antoine Chkaiban, a technology infrastructure analyst at New Street Research. Antoine, thank you so much for being here. So how significant is this for Nvidia? And I should mention, they haven't gotten the full go-ahead. They say they're going to they will get these licenses approved to sell these chips once again. So how much of a positive is this for Nvidia?
Yes, hi Julie, thanks for having me. Yes, I mean, during a recent visit to Beijing, Jensen, confirmed that they had the plan to restart shipping the shipments of H20 to Chinese customers, and they don't have the full go-ahead, but they do have the assurance, that the export licenses will be granted again, and they are very optimistic. They expect deliveries to begin shortly. Just to put a bit of context, the H20 ban was a 2.5 billion headwind to revenues in the first quarter, and Nvidia expects another 8 billion in the second quarter. So that's more than 10 billion, that Nvidia didn't expect to recognize because of the ban, and that they now see as an opportunity again. And if you put even more context, like looking backwards, China has been historically as much as 20 to 25% of Nvidia's data center business. It came down, like with the H20 ban, it came down to zero, more recently, and now they do expect China to become an opportunity again. And we don't expect, China to become 20 to 25% again over the long run, because China is now working, on its own chips. Huawei is developing the Ascend, but we do expect, maybe levels similar to prior to the H20 ban, maybe in the 10 to 15% region.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, sort of where they get back to. I mean, in addition to the H20, the company has also now developed another chip called the RTX Pro GPU that they say is compliant in the China market. Does that make up some portion of that revenue there? What role does that chip play?
I mean, it's just Nvidia, innovating and, letting some of that innovation flow through to the Chinese market. China is not standing still. They're also innovating. They're bringing new chips to market. Of course, they're lagging behind Nvidia. They don't have Nvidia's ecosystem either to make the adoption of their chips as easy, as flawless as adopting an Nvidia GPU. But they're still innovating, and so Nvidia cannot stand still. They have to, respect the export license, but they can still bring a new generation to market. And clearly, like the U.S. administration's authorization, I mean, at least showing signs of authorizing to ship the chips again, is a sign that Nvidia has an open conversation with them, and that they can keep innovating and remain somewhat competitive. At the end of the day, it's striking the right balance between not completely losing the opportunity and not allowing China to accelerate too much, its competitiveness in AI. So it's a very thin balance that they have to strike.
Antoine, Nvidia shares are at a record again today. As we know, it broke that $4 trillion market cap. Is there anything that will stop Nvidia from continuing to move higher?
I don't think there's like a hard stop around the corner, I think, there are some very strong signals in terms of demand. You hear Altman talk about its GPUs melting. You have already some hyperscalers who are giving strong signs around next year, growth continuing into next year. The roadmap of hyperscalers of getting to millions of XPUs in their largest clusters, in their frontier clusters on a 2027 horizon. You have Broadcom guiding next year already. You have TSMC, who's like putting out all the wafers to make these XPUs, who's guiding until the end of the decade, very strong growth, and that's consistent with the peak being clearly still further away. So on all areas, I don't see anything stopping them down. Now, don't get me wrong, there might be like an investment cycle. We might take a bit of time to get to the next peak, but clearly the hyperscalers and the global economy is getting replatformed, and there is plenty of headroom for capex to increase further, for the capital intensity of the global economy to increase further, and that will fuel very strong investments in XPUs and NVIDIA in particular.
I mean, it's interesting, Antoine. At one point, we were having the discussion around Nvidia, meaning the analyst community and folks who watch the stock, about whether we were going to see a trade down effect at some point, right? What were there other chips that could do inference rather than, the view being that Nvidia is best for training, although certainly Jensen Huang has made the argument that it's also good for inference, but that at some point we were going to see clients and customers maybe migrate to some cheaper chips. I haven't heard that discussion as much recently. Is that still a concern?
It's always there. That concern is always there. It doesn't go away. But I don't know if you follow the news flow, around Microsoft, for example, struggling in ramping its own ASIC, and Microsoft is working with Marvell, for example. That also impacted Marvell stock. I mean, we do expect ASICs like custom silicon developed by like a handful of hyperscalers, and say at the maximum you have 10 customers in the world who can have the scale to get there. We don't expect all of them to succeed. It's very hard. It's very hard for so many reasons. It's hard from like making a chip that's flexible, making a chip that can easily be used by your developers. Anyone can put out a chip. I mean, not anyone, but many people can put out a chip that's very, very good on paper, that has very, very good performance on paper. The key challenge is to be able to make a good use of that chip. And making good use of that chip, that's exactly NVIDIA's know-how. Being able to, optimize workloads, being able to learn from all the experience that it has, its very large installed base, to ensure that all its customers can really fully utilize those chips, to shorten development cycles, to allow enterprises to quickly bring, like new workloads to market. That has a lot of value. And that's where ASICs are going to struggle. Of course, you're going to have other companies. We know that Google is already there. For example, they have the TPU. They're at their fifth or sixth generation by now. They've been doing that for more than 10 years, and they still buy GPUs. So it's not going to represent, in my view, like a material headwind to NVIDIA. Both are going to coexist.
Antoine, good to see you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.